Okay, the next two people that we're interviewing for their experiences during World War II, Mr. Robert Wilbur, former teacher in Little Falls High School, taught mathematics here for many years. And on my left-hand side, Mr. Ralph Van Horn, who was taught here in Little Falls since probably in the early 50s, right up through to the 1970s when he retired. He is now the town historian in the town of Little Falls. And they're going to talk to us about their experiences during World War II. I'll start with Bob. Bob, did you enlist or were you drafted? What were the circumstances?
Well, let's put it this way. I volunteered. I became an employee of the Army. And my job was to train pilots with the Army. But after a time, I would say about a year, the draft board did not like the idea of the Army taking their candidates away from them. And so they told the Army that if we were not voluntarily enlisted, then they would step in and take us away from the pilot training program. So this caused all kinds of consternation. We had something like 300 pilots at the field I was working at. And so the call went out for us to get up to Camp Blanding in a hurry and get in the Army, which we all did. We were shipped back to Lakeland, where our base was, and continued on with no further annoyance from the draft board.
All right. Now that's Lakeland, Florida.
Lakeland, Florida.
Okay. And you had been a pilot before the service period.
I was just an ordinary civilian pilot, flew on weekends and rented a Piper Cub for $5, $6 an hour. And when the war started, I had about 35 hours. That was swelled up to 100 hours by special training, and then I was accepted by the Air Force, Army Air Forces, I should say. And then I was given my instructor's rating on a commercial license, and then I spent the rest of the war doing just that, instructing.
And all of this was done down in Florida?
All of my work was in Florida. I was a resident of Florida at the time, and I was mustered out in Georgia. So I am really not a New York State veteran at all. I'm a Florida veteran.
All right, now we'll leave you for a minute. We'll switch over here to Ralph, and we'll get Ralph started on this. Ralph, were you drafted or did you enlist?
Well, I'm different than the other fellows. I was drafted.
All right. And when did all this take place?
Well, my number came up before Pearl Harbor, but I was teaching in a country school at the time. Board of Education did the usual thing. They advertised and got no responses, and so they went to the draft board and said, can we hang on to this fellow for a while? And they said, yes, you can have him for about 6 months. Well, that 6 months took us through Pearl Harbor, just a few months after that. And I can remember finishing the school year in June and going home and finding a letter with Uncle Sam's greetings.
Yes.
So I was in service by the middle of July. I had 2 weeks vacation that summer.
And you went in, well, you weren't from the Mohawk Valley at that period
No,
of time,
no.
So you didn't go to Albany or Syracuse
No.
as processing
I
stuff?
processed through, well, I had my testing in Albany, but I processed through New Paltz, and then they sent us to Camp Upton in Long Island. And we went through there, and they dumped us on a troop train, never told us where we were going. We spent 3 days and wound up in Macon, Georgia. And I was in the infantry.
Oh, yeah.
I had my basic training in Macon, Georgia in August and September. I think it was a 6-week cycle, but it stretched out to 8 weeks, something like that. Rough, tough stuff.
That was after Pearl Harbor.
Yes.
This was after Pearl Harbor.
Like, I heard that, like the veterans would say after, I know people, you know, who after Pearl Harbor happened and they were anxious to go and fight. I mean, it's like they wanted to go now. It's like, yeah.
Oh, that's a good question, yes.
We had lots of incentive.
All of a sudden, you know, like you, yes, now I want to go, now I want to go.
We had lots of incentive. There was no question about it. Our cycle was trained, however, for the North African campaign. They deliberately dehydrated us in training.
How'd they do that?
They'd send you out for a day's exercise when it was 100 degrees with 1 quart of water. And that's all that you had.
Down in Georgia, right?
That's right.
Oh.
The North African campaign started in November of '42, so
That's right.
you'd have to really hustle through basic training from July to get on board ship and everything and there, and all the ducks lined up in a row to land near Algeria or wherever it was.
Well, that was true, but when they finished with us, they dumped us on another troop train, and this one went north instead of west, where most of the troops were going. And I wound up in Washington, D.C., in a military police outfit. I wasn't very happy about that. But they took us out to Bowling Field, which is on the outskirts of Washington. And in the usual Army method, you know, you sit around.
Yes.
Finally, a few of us were taken out and taken to the other end of the field and turned over to a Signal Corps outfit. So I was in the Signal Corps.
From the infantry to the MPs
That's
to the
right.
signal.
That's right. 3 services within a month. And in the interview with the commanding officer, he said, what would you like to do? I said, I'm sure I don't know what you do around here. But wound up working in a headquarters of an Army communication outfit. Was stationed on Bowling Field. It was administrative work. In other words, I was part of the chairborne command.
All right. And you stayed there at Bowling Field for a long period of time?
I was there from September until the following May. In other words, through that winter. And then the outfit moved from there and took over the City Hall in Asheville, North Carolina. And they moved all of us who were working there at the time as a unit. Moved them with this headquarters down there, and at the same time transferred us into the Air Corps. So I was moved into another outfit,
All right.
in another service rather.
Asheville, that's right up in the mountains, isn't it?
It
Pretty
is.
close, yeah.
It is.
Why they keep moving you around? Did you ask?
This is typical of the service.
They didn't, that was just their one
But
stop around.
I spent the rest of the war in Asheville,
Asheville, North Carolina.
except for the last couple months.
All right. Okay, now let's switch back over here to Bob for a while. Now, we've got you down there in Lakeland, Florida, flying these airplanes, and you showed us a picture of a group over there. I don't know if Joe can get to that or not.
That's a typical group. Each period of training, we were given 5 students, and hopefully we were to keep with those 5 students for 10 weeks and graduate them so they could go on up to basic in Georgia, and 10 weeks in basic would lead them on into advanced. The Air Force does not train that way anymore. This, as I say, is a typical group. Now, when I first started in August of '42, I was given a mop-up job on some British cadets. I say a mop-up job. These are cadets that they had been transferred from their instructors, and they had a small amount of time here and a small amount of time there. And I rode, you might say, rode shotgun with them to get their time up. My first class was 43C. 43C meaning in 1943 the C class would be graduating. About 2 classes later, one morning we came to the field and we saw all these cadets with blue uniforms on. And we had been told nothing about any change in cadets. And these, believe it or not, were West Pointers. And they had a field up near Newburgh called Stewart Field, but they didn't have any instructors to instruct them. So they sent them all down to Lakeland. And this was a new experience for us because if you know anything about the West Pointers, and I'm sure you do, they are very rigid militarily. And it was very difficult to get them to relax while you were talking with them, because the minute you spoke to them, they would go into a brace. But I think before their 10 weeks was over, they got them back in the realm of a human being again. Then I finished out the last 2 years with just class after class after class, to the point that I think my total was somewhere up around 105 students that I graduated.
And these were fighter pilots or bomber
I
pilots?
got, mostly mine were bomber pilots because they were tall. When we started out the training, the only fighter craft we had were really built for small people. The P-39, for instance. Now, my brother, whose picture is right here next to the group, he was a P-39 pilot, and he's quite a bit shorter than I am, and he, I think, had a little trouble tucking himself into that cockpit. And today, I know very well he would have a great deal of difficulty getting into the cockpit. That had a cannon on it, if you recall. The cannon was right between the pilot's knees. Then, of course, there was the P-38, which had the twin tails. That had a small cockpit on it. So my pilots were all usually 6 feet and over until later on, and then I got anybody. They made the fighters bigger. The P-51 was really a big airplane. The P-47 was a monster, so that didn't hold anymore. But as I would say, most of mine were bomber pilots.
Now, did any people ever, well, I'm sure some people didn't make it through the training, but some probably went out in a spectacular fashion. That plane doesn't look like it's, you know, all that sturdy to me.
All that what?
Sturdy.
Oh, sturdy.
Yeah.
Well, it is one of the sturdiest airplanes that the Air Force ever had. It had a diving potential of somewhere up over 240 miles an hour. And it was stressed for all kinds of aerobatics, including an inverted spin. We never had one come apart, unless it hit the ground, then it came apart. But they were a very, very durable airplane, and they are now being used for crop dusting. And they put a 600 horsepower engine on them, I believe it is, which is a very, very heavy engine. Then plus all a load of crop dusting materials. It's quite a strain on. I always felt quite safe in the Stearman is what they call it, and the Navy used the same airplane. They just gave it a different designation.
You said your brother was in the Air Force too. He was from Little Falls?
He was born here in Little Falls. We moved to Dowsville in 1923. He enlisted from Dowsville, but his name is Cole, first name, and if you know your geography around this area, you'll know there's a Cole Road up there just a little ways, and that was his grandfather and great-grandfather that established that name up in that area.
Did you ever meet anybody in your training cycles from this area that you can recall?
One day I was on a cross country, and I kept looking at the pilot in the back seat. I kept looking at him, he kept looking at me. We were on about a 100-mile cross country trip down around the Bach Tower and then back up over Cypress Gardens. We landed, and I said, "Aren't you?" He says, "Yes, I am." His name was Arnie Davis, and he was a friend. He was a brother of a friend of mine in Dowsville. And then there was another pilot, and I cannot remember his name right now. He was from Dowsville. But we had, when the West Pointers came in, we had several notable people there. Jimmy Doolittle's son was there. Lowell Thomas's son was in that class. And then there was a General Walsh's son that was in that class. So every once in a while we'd have one of these notables, or 2 or 3 of them come in, and they would get a lot of press coverage.
All right. Now we'll switch back over to Ralph here. Ralph, we left you in Asheville, North Carolina. We don't want to leave you there too long, if they had a drought down there this summer. Then you went, where did you go from Asheville?
Well, the work that I did in Nashville was administrative work. It was headquarters of an Army Airways communication system, it was called. We supplied radio and all forms of communication between the major airports in the world, all over the world. So our outfit was scattered all over. It was of division strength, but our headquarters only had about 100 people. I was there at VE Day. That was just another working day with us.
No celebration?
No. We were
Another Army thing.
we were so busy getting ready for the Japanese that we had no time off. And I was there for VJ Day, and unfortunately, at that time, they simply said the order came down, all the 6 stripers are on duty. So that was my VJ Day celebration, to be on duty. About 2 months after the war was over, typically, the Air Force decided to move us. So we took over Langley Field in Virginia. And I was sent up there on the advanced enlisted detail. Landed on the field late one night and took my orders into the commanding officer, who happened to be a chicken colonel, and he looked at me and roared at me, said, "How come you come in here and tell us that we have to turn over the field to you?" I said, "Colonel, look at your radio orders. You got them today." So I was there for about 3 or 4 months, and that was the period when the Army was literally disintegrating after the war. It was quite a job to reconstitute a headquarters when the thing that you watched continually were the number of points that everybody had. So-and-so had so many points. You could hold on to him. This fella, write him off. He's going tomorrow or the next day.
You picked up points by overseas tours and by time in
Time and
service?
service for most of us.
Yeah.
Mine was a total of 42 points, as you can see. 3.5 years of service. But I reached that magical point in February of 1940, or January of 1946. And they shipped me out to Mitchell Field, Long Island. And I went through the process there just the same as Charlie. When they asked me, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "Absolutely nothing," because I wanted out. And so I can remember well, they gave you the train tickets and the bus tickets, and I squalled because they gave me the train tickets and everything back to where I went in service. And I wasn't living there anymore. So I just tore the tickets up, bought my own, and went home. I was back working within, I think it was 2 days after I was discharged.
Back to teaching school.
Right? I got my old job back, and let's say, I didn't have any leave time or anything like that.
Okay.
Get back to the South.
Now, we'll get back to Bob here. We left you down at Lakeland there, and you had trained over 100 Air Force pilots. And the war comes to an end, and what were your experiences then?
Well, I came back north then. I had been reassigned in the last 2 or 3 months of my career with the Air Force, Army Air Force, and I had been reassigned to a radar school. And so I brought my family up here because I was going to have to go away for 2 years to go to this radar school. But in the meantime, we dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, and my career with the radar school ended right there. They didn't need any more radar people. So there I was, back here with my family, Unfortunately, my dad, who was in business, needed my services, so I went to work for him for a spell.
You never took any of the GI Bill or 5220
No,
club options?
I went to work for him, and I didn't have any need for it, really. So I was a radio announcer when the war started, and I did plan to go back into the radio business, but I enjoyed the type business my dad had, so I stayed with him. And then I later on went into the insurance business, and then I went into teaching again, which is what I was doing all during the war anyway, was teaching. And that's the story of my life.
What did you think about them dropping the bomb?
Hmm?
What did you think about them dropping the bomb?
Well, I was riding back and forth to Utica at that places, and I saw the headlines as I came. I got on the bus down here on Main Street by the bank building, and I saw that streamer on the paper, and I was absolutely flabbergasted. I didn't know we had anything, a weapon of that kind. Very few people did. And I guess for 2 or 3 days we were all stunned about it.
Did you know how bad it was over there? How bad the bomb was?
Did we know how bad it
How
was?
bad,
We began to understand how bad it was, yes.
Was it in the paper and stuff?
Were in the paper?
I mean, it was in the paper that talked about it?
As far as I recall, yes. About people being incinerated and that sort of thing, yes.
I think that news hit the newsreels. That's how you got most of your news then. Instead of television, you go to the movies, and in between the double features at the old Rialto, there'd be this RKO Path movie tone news,
Oh, yeah.
and they would roll that, and I mean, they got in there pretty fast. I
Yeah,
mean,
how
so
did they
way
get in?
faster than they would have today
How'd
because
they
of
get in so
the
fast?
Radio was number
Right on-
one.
Right on the film, right on the cinema, so quickly it would seem.
Well, I didn't
Like-
mean instantly,
I know,
not like
I know
television,
instantly, but
perhaps within a
like-
couple of weeks, because everyone was interested in this, and as you know, in the news business, you have to get the product out to the public, and that's what they want.
Don't forget, the services had their own photographers and journalists and everything, and they fed that stuff to the civilian press. That's how it got there so fast.
what did the civilians think about it? I mean, people, were in the service. What did the civilians think, think was pretty bad too, or were they just glad it was over?
I don't recall any
They
civilians
didn't say
saying
anything?
very much about it.
I think in the outfit I was in, we realized that the end was very close, because we handled radio communications, and let me tell you, the radio was really hot the last few months.
As far as communication is concerned, now, one of my neighbors was a radio operator at that time, and he flashed the news from is it Ainatiwak, or wherever the bomber left?
Anahuac.
And we talk, yeah.
Anahuac. But he flashed the news, which was picked up in Washington, that the bomb had been dropped. And he didn't know what it was all about, because they had a name for the bomb.
I was gonna say, did they call it the bomb?
No, they didn't call it the bomb. They had a
code
name
names.
for it, like Charlie's Gone Home or something
Yeah.
like that, And he's told me 2 or 3 times this story about it. He was the one that flashed it.
Well, gentlemen, we've got the war over with. One more question or two for each of you. As I asked the same question to John and Charlie earlier, do you ever visit the places that you were in during service, or keep up with any of the people that you knew?
I have. I've talked to several of the old pilots. Of course, most of the pilots were the supervisory pilots. They were 10 to 15 years older than I was at the time. And they have now since gone on the long, long trail. But some of them that flew at the same time I did. And one of them was from over here at Cortland. And incidentally, he's a Caterpillar. You know what a Caterpillar is? It's one who was bailed out of a burning airplane or a destroyed airplane, one that's disabled. And he's a Caterpillar and has had a lot of experience in the Air Force. I see him once in a while. My flight commander is living in Lakeland, and I'm going to see him in about a month. There's quite a few of them still living in Lakeland. They like Lakeland so much that
It's nice though.
when the war was over, they just bought homes there, and they're still there.
What about you, Al?
I visited one of my wartime buddies back in 1974. It's the only one I have kept in touch with. And I also visited Asheville on that trip and hardly found my way around. It has changed so much. But the other places I was in, no, I haven't gone back there.
Never got to Africa. I'll let you too.
Well,